Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live, talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynn@pghcitypaper.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the show, April 11, Thursday, 2019. The big breaking news, because it just broke pretty much, is the arrest of Julian Assange. I always want to say the loathsome Julian Assange. And I would imagine his imminent extradition to the United States. This is going to be, I'm not going to jump in here until I'm able to look at the law, exactly what he's charged with, legal repercussions. I have little doubt that the Glenn Greenwalds and Snowdens of the world will argue that he was just being a journalist. I've never looked at Julian Assange as a journalist. But you'll have to forgive me because of the lateness of when this broke. I don't feel comfortable talking about it. I would think it's a pretty difficult case to argue without stepping on legitimate journalistic probes. Although I think what Julian Assange did was criminal. It was certainly reckless. It certainly doesn't fit under any definition of journalism that I would acknowledge. I mean, I am a holder of a journalism degree myself, and journalism is more than getting information and dumping it without carefully going through it, determining its efficacy, what's important, what is not, what is potentially dangerous to people or nations. I don't know. He didn't do any of that. He's a sort of bull in a china shop. Damn the torpedoes, damn the consequences. I don't know. I find him personally, as I said, loathsome. And I'm glad this is going to become a national holiday probably in Ecuador because they finally got rid of him. I don't know. So I will just sort of hold my fire because I don't want to say things that are not grounded in fact. I was right. Well, earlier I was trying to read the indictment that was that the U.S. had sent to, I guess, to Great Britain. And it was much longer than I thought it would be, so I didn't have an opportunity to really do it all. Anyway, never a dull moment. I want to talk more about my astonishment, and shame on me, about Bill Barr, the Attorney General of the United States. I recall saying, I'm hoping you don't, but I'll out myself here. I recall saying that when he was facing his the Senate Judiciary Committee after being nominated by the president, that I came up with a fantasy, and that is what it was, a fantasy that maybe Barr was itching to get into this job so that he could be the hero that saves the country. I was actually thinking that he'd say the right things to Trump and the others, get himself in the job, and then ensure that the Mueller investigation was allowed to go on unfettered, that we would certainly see it, that he would stand up. I don't know why I came to this determination after, I don't know, reading something about him and also seeing that he was a friend. He and Mueller are friends. How do you come in and essentially try to bury your friend's incredibly difficult 2 years of work? God, I wish Mueller would open up a little bit. But Barr is, it's been said that Trump never understood that an attorney general is not his lawyer. But he's got one now. Even the loathsome Jeff Sessions was, I mean, Barr's being worse in terms of, I think, doing the bidding, not of the American people, but of this president. And his characterization, his use of the word spying yesterday in that Senate committee was startling. That's when my blood ran cold. We now have an attorney general who is reciting the verbiage, the crazed verbiage that comes out of the president's mouth. Hoax, witch hunt, spying. The FBI was not spying, it was gathering intelligence on what at the time was perceived a potential national security threat. I mean, to use the word spying, for the Attorney General to use the word spying is to kick every person who works under him in the teeth. I'm spying, the term. I don't know about you, but it suggests nefarious, potentially, illegal. It's got a negative connotation. Spying. Intelligence gathering does not. The fact that Barr, in front of congressional committees, so clearly sits there as a firewall between the people and the findings of our Justice Department. And instead turning it all on its head and now suggesting that what needs to be done is a investigation into how the witch hunt, essentially, right, happened. He might as well, what are they all trying to get jobs on Fox News? I don't even understand this. There is so much to be concerned about. But anyone knows how democracies die, certainly knows that when an executive branch and a judicial branch and whole parts of our legislative branch sort of join together in a protection racket, we're in terrible, terrible, terrible danger. It's you know, when you try to think about just one aspect of the corruption of our institutions, of our private sector, public sector, it's really, I don't want to bring you guys down, but it really is, it's breathtaking. And how quickly. At any rate. Another thing that is a absolute example of the corruption of our system, and this brings us to healthcare system, is at first, I have to say, at first when I heard that people in this country were actually dying for lack of insulin, I didn't believe. I still, there's part of me, I guess it's the part that just doesn't want to lose my mind totally, that is capable of denial. I thought that's impossible. What do you mean? Insulin has been around forever. How do you die for lack of insulin? Well, you die for lack of insulin if this, the richest nation on earth, tolerates a misnomer of a health care system that doesn't make a life-saving drug affordable and available to the millions and a growing number of Americans who need it to live. How is this? How is this allowed? This would not happen in any other developed nation. Diabetics don't die in these other nations for lack of access to insulin. It's as important to them as access to oxygen. How do we tolerate this? And of course, the people who die for lack of insulin are people without the money to buy it. Some of them are actually, I believe, insured. But with, you know, the way our system works, high deductibles or this, that, and the other thing. Meanwhile, companies have been raising the price of insulin, which is, there is no reason why that should be tolerated. And we have a government. Well, actually, let us say now, enough people apparently have died that enough members of Congress have gotten calls or visits from constituents telling these unbelievable stories of loved ones dying or putting their health in total jeopardy by not having access to this drug that is not one of these drugs that cost $1 gazillion to make or something. Been around for, I don't know, as long as I can remember. People didn't die for lack of it. I mean, if they knew they had diabetes and had a prescription. The patent for insulin was granted, it was granted almost 100 years ago. There was a hearing held with pharmaceutical companies and the middlemen in our totally corrupted system of health care. And I think it was a Republican who said, well, you guys have managed to do something that no one thought could be done in this day and age in Washington, D.C. You've created something on which the Congress, Republicans and Democrats, will come together. You've actually, by your vileness and your murderous conduct, these are my words, not his, have brought bipartisanship on this issue. So we hear that both Democrats and Republicans want to do something. So do it! The price of insulin has nearly doubled in the last few years. In this great country of ours, with our wonderful system of health care and health insurance access and, aiding and abetting the greed of pharmaceutical companies, we now have a drug that millions of Americans require to live that on average costs $6,000 a year for each person requiring it. And now people are dying in our country for lack of access to insulin. That alone is almost all you need to know about the state of the United States. Our very name is a misnomer now. These disunited states. If I needed a drug, I have the resources to get that drug. So I should get to live because I have more financial resources than my neighbor. They should die. 2019, United States of America. Woo, USA, USA. And people are dying for lack of ability to access a drug that's been around in our entire lifetimes and was always affordable until the United States became the United States of insatiable greed. Drives me nuts. Okie doke. Lou says, Barr makes me think, why do we trust Mueller so much? Well, we do because we've been told that he is above reproach, that he is, have you ever heard someone say a negative word about him, except of course, Trump? We have been told, we saw how, what a tight ship he ran. He's like out of some mold that doesn't exist much anymore. A man of character and honor and who is tough as nails and does it by the book. By the book, by the boom. I hate that ad. You know what ad I'm talking about? What is that? I hate that ad. Okay. Why do we trust Mueller, she says? Yeah, we wanted to believe that Barr was going to be at least honest or honorable, even if he was biased. But this doesn't appear to be what's happening here. It's amazing. Oh, did you see Donald's sister, his older sister, Mary Ann? She's like 10 years older than him, but she's been a judge, a federal judge forever. I think first appointed by Reagan, then reappointed somewhere by Clinton. She's been around forever. This is Donald's older sister. I think I said that. She has finally resigned. And you know why she resigned? Because of real journalism, not WikiLeaks. Because of an article that the New York Times did. Was it just a week or two ago? Who can remember anything anymore? Talking about how the Trump family, the siblings and their children engaged in all kinds of dodgy behavior in regard to their money, and engaged in tax schemes that in all likelihood were illegal, because that's what Trumps do. And she, as a federal judge, would understand the business and how this money was coming to her. And so she benefited financially from what, if you read the New York Times article, appeared to be criminal activity. And she was not just some bystander. And so she's just decided, well, I think I'm going to retire, because even if it doesn't rise to criminal level, it rises to a level that would make her position up for the kind of scrutiny that can come from judicial, counsel. There are policing of judges. Yeah. And since she resigned, it says the investigation into, because there was an investigation started. A court official, I'm sorry, I lost my place here. A court official notified her that an investigation by the Conduct Council, Judicial Conduct Council, was underway. And lo and behold, 10 days later, she said, well, okay, I'm out of here. And the fact that she's no longer a judge by virtue of her resignation means the investigation stops. Because it's not a criminal inquiry, it's in-house. Retired judges are not subject to the same conduct rules. So yet another, boy, Trump's really, they're Houdinis. They really know how to escape. And get this will make you puke. In retirement, she will be paid the same that she was paid while she was actually working. Well, isn't that nice? Wouldn't you like a deal like that? Boy, that's nice. We, the taxpayers, are going to be paying her $200,000 a year. $200,000 a year for sitting at home and counting her money. I was in Costco yesterday, bumped into a woman I knew from my television days. And boy, she told me she had been forced out, downsizing, and she was struggling financially. She was stunned by how little she got in this pension that she had been promised. And I mean, just she's supposed to make it on $500 a month or something. Judge Trump here will get $200,000 a year. I'm sorry. I mean, anyone who values any sense of fairness would find that just reprehensible. Beth writes, clearly smarter than me, the moment Barr was nominated, I knew this was not going to go down a good path. I remembered his work under H.W. Bush when he was also Attorney General. He recommended the pardons of former Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger and 5 others, saying he found that they had been unjustly treated by a special counsel who had charged them with a number of offenses, including lying to Congress. Barr, I guess, just thinks people in positions of authority should not be held accountable ever. Gives them a break. I wonder if he'd give a break to a regular guy, maybe caught lifting a donut from a convenience store. I doubt it. After Barr was sworn in as the current Attorney General, Beth writes, his son was moved from the Department of Justice over to the White House counsel's office. You're kidding me. Barr's son works in the White House counsel's office? Beth writes, I also question if he and Mueller are really friends. During his confirmation hearing, he told the Senate Judiciary Committee he and Mueller were friends. Right. I watched his wife's face, and it told me they were acquaintances maybe, but not for... Well. No, I thought he said they had dinner together, like, regularly or something. Oh, who knows? Oh, dear, 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 dear. I just... Incredible. Oh, and you see who's popped back up? God help us. Yeah, the other Pope. We forget we got 2 right now. The other Pope. The ex one. 92-year-old Pope Benedict has chimed in on the church's sexual abuse scandal, and his remarks are repulsive. Essentially, he blames it on the 1960s. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll made priests start molesting people. I don't know. I give up. He said, why did pedophilia reach such proportions? The reason is the absence of God. So I guess he's decided that the 60s, God died or something, right? And so he really seems hung up on homosexuality because he talks about homosexual cliques in seminaries. And then he suggests that since there are gay priests, that they are the ones doing this, and homosexuals tend to be pedophiles. I mean, you cannot... Here's what he says. Since I myself served in a position of responsibility as shepherd of the church at the time of the public outbreak of the crisis, and during the run-up to it, I had to ask myself, even though as emeritus Pope, I am no longer directly responsible, what I could contribute to a new beginning. So what he contributed was that Vatican II was wrong. Catholic moral theology suffered a collapse during a period of major reforms. That would be throwing some of his predecessors under the bus. He goes on to freak out about sexual freedom. An outcome of the sexual revolution, the old Pope says, is that pedophilia was then also diagnosed as allowed and appropriate. What the fuck, excuse me, is he talking about? That was a direct quote from him. Pedophilia was allowed and appropriate. So, in other words, the Pope is blaming the sexual abuse crisis in the church on liberals and saying that they said, go ahead, you pedophiles, go for it, and also on gays. And this goes against everything, every little thing, and I say little, that the current Pope has been trying to sort of move things toward. This kind of clerical abuse, I hate to tell the old Pope, was going on, hello, well before the 1960s. You know what my guess is? It was going on in the 1860s. You know what else my guess is? Let's go back to the 1760s and the 1660s and the 1560s. Jeez. Unbelievable. So anyway, there he is. He should go back to being quiet. I mean, I thought that's what he was going to do, not get in the way of the current Pope, who's shooting himself in the foot enough in regard to this sexual abuse crisis. God almighty. Barbara says that Jeffrey Toobin today, that's the legal scholar, sounded the alarm about Attorney General Bill Barr's baseless claim that the FBI spied on the Trump campaign. Toobin said this. Oh my God. After seeing what Barr had said and talking about what here's what he said. It means Fox News is in charge of the Justice Department, he said. Oh my God. This really, Toobin said, is an extraordinary adoption of the conspiratorial language the president and his supporters used to describe the Mueller investigation and the Justice Department. That's right. That's what he did. Barr goes before a Senate hearing yesterday and speaks of his own department using the same terminology that the crazed conspiracy theorists and traffickers in propaganda use at Fox. The fact that he said spying, the fact that he suggested that there was some kind of conspiracy going on means, again, he's adopting. We got an attorney general, might as well be Rupert Murdoch. Great. Toobin says Barr has obviously been watching a lot of Fox News since he became a private citizen. He's adopting their language and characterization of the very department that he now heads. Well, that's how, as I said, that's how democracies die. Obit of the day. Charles Van Doren died at the age of 93. Oh, boy. You do remember this, right? I mean, and if you don't, maybe you saw the movie quiz show starring Ralph Fiennes, right, as Charles Van Doren. Yeah, Charles Van Doren. He was a contestant on a quiz show in the 1950s. And he was he was like the guy I was talking about on Jeopardy who won again. He knew the answers to everything he was asked. And although if you ever see video of him, that he'd be put in this soundproof booth and ask the questions, and he'd be sweating and really, you could tell, oh God, he doesn't know, this is going to be the end of him, he doesn't. And then somehow he would spit out the correct answers. He became a huge, huge phenomenon. No one had won more money. The quiz show, by the way, was called 21. And he was on the cover of Time magazine. He signed this huge contract with NBC. He was gold. He, by the way, was a son of a very famous man who was a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet and literary critic, and that would be Mark Van Doren. So at the time, Mark Van Doren was very well known, and then here's his kid. And he was telegenic, that kind of, Van Doren, they must be Dutch. I was going to say waspy, but Dutch kind of way. And then, people in the Justice Department started spying about these shows, just to use our current Attorney General's words. The FBI got, tips that these shows were fixed, and so they began spying on the shows. And he denied in a grand jury. He told a grand jury, "No, I did not in any way. I knew those answers. I did it." He refused to acknowledge that he had in any way been involved in this conspiracy to mislead the viewers of America. But he finally cracked in front of Congress. And in 1959, he finally fessed up that he had been given the questions and the answers in advance of the shows. And he had, in fact, been coached on how to make it look like he was really struggling to find the answers in his head. Probably brought in, drama coaches for him. Well, that resulted, obviously, in a huge, huge story. And a lot of these shows went down. He avoided jail, although he was convicted of perjury and all kinds of other stuff. And he was disgraced, and he ends up working, though. Get this is sort of funny, because he was a smart guy. He ends up working for the Encyclopedia Britannica. I'm surprised they would hire him, but they did. And they moved him to their Chicago headquarters, and he eventually became a vice president of Encyclopedia Britannica, which I did not know. But there he was. He refused to talk about it most of his life. He finally wrote a piece about it in The New Yorker in, I think, this century, 2008. And he would not help anyone who made documentaries about it. He did not in any way. Robert Redford had approached him to be a consultant for the film Redford was producing, which was the quiz show with Ralph Fiennes, and he refused $100,000 for that position. Anyway, that's it. Charles Van Doren. You don't suppose we'll find out that the guy, this genius on Jeopardy, he did the same thing yesterday. He's playing the game. Excuse me while I rant a little bit. He's playing the game unlike anyone else has ever played it. He's playing it like the professional gambler that he is. And it's interesting to watch. And it shows how sort of timid most of us are. We don't say, I'm taking everything I got here and I'm putting all my chips in. And that's what he even uses that language. But once in a while, that bet doesn't work. Last night, he lost everything in one of those bets. But he ends up ultimately, by doubling down and doubling down, winning huge sums of money. I can't even remember what he's up to now. And what I don't like about the way he's playing is that you could argue it's a game and he's playing to win. But it's also a game that we at home also like, and it's always been it's not cutthroat. It never has been. There was one guy years ago who played it in a way that I'd never seen before, and I didn't like him for it. Usually they play by starting with the easier questions in the row and moving down. But what this guy, the current guy, and what the guy years ago did is they start at the bottom with the toughest questions, because you can get $1,000 or $2,000 instead of $100 or $200. But it makes the game then this really sort of cutthroat kind of a game. And I'm not enjoying it. So this guy just starts and he goes to the very bottom, takes every $1,000 question, and generally gets them. So he's in the, I don't know. I don't like him. Winning isn't everything. It's how you play the game. I don't like how he's playing the damn game. We got a caller. I'll stop. If you guys who don't watch Jeopardy, you don't care. Hello, caller.
Hello. Hi, Lynn. This is Bree in Dubai.
Oh, hi, Bree.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Don't know if you can hear me. I don't know, on YouTube, the picture is a still picture for me, and I have the audio, but maybe that's just my system tonight. I don't know. But yeah, you were talking about Charles Van Doren, and I kind of have an interest in that whole topic. I've read a lot about it. In fact, I have a book here on my shelf, Primetime and Misdemeanors, about the quiz show scandals. It's a very rare book. I don't know if you can even still find it. But I was always fascinated by it. And, Van Doren, one of the interesting aspects of it was sort of went into hiding. He was secluded for many, many years, only coming out in 2008. He wrote an article called All the Answers. I believe it was in Vanity Fair or The New Yorker, probably The New Yorker.
Yes, it was.
In which he, and he provided his only public statements, if you will, about that time period. So it was fascinating. He basically, in the article, he was trying to address the issues that many people had raised over the years, and he was also, in a way, kind of saying that in order to atone for this, he had turned down a $100,000 offer from Robert Redford to consult on that movie. In other words, he was saying, I don't want to profit from this. You know, he was kind of getting that in there as a little bit of public relations. But I always thought it was fascinating that he was able to be quiet for so long.
Well, I think it was the right thing to do, don't you? You know, he didn't, or do you think he owed it, to the curious?
Well, nowadays.
What? Oh, nowadays.
I think nowadays.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would make the person very famous.
Of course, because nowadays celebrity is everything and honor is nothing. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well,
they say that was the time when we learned television first lied to us, you know. And actually, there was an episode of PBS, The American Experience, which was hosted by David McCullough, that looked at the quiz show scandals.
Right.
So it's a very interesting look at it as well. And those are really the two, I think, best views of it. The PBS documentary, or the American Experience episode, and then All the Answers article. And the Robert Redford movie, I thought, was quite long. I thought it went into a lot of areas that perhaps it didn't need to do. And the one guy who was Rob Morrow, I think, who played the Dr. Joel on Northern Exposure, I never really bought into his accent. So that always tends to,
well, what
harm
I
one's
don't,
viewing of a film.
Bree, what I don't remember is, so obviously Van Doren was not the first. Van Doren was not the first person, the first contestant to be given the answers. Was the guy before him that he knocked off on the show? Had he been given the answers too?
Oh, absolutely. It was rampant throughout the industry. In fact, the one that really broke it was a woman by the name of Marie Wynn, who was on a show called Dotto. And subsequently, she went on to, she has written about it as well. And she now has, I forget what she's doing, but she was given the answers. And there was a backup contestant whom they did not use, who was sitting off screen. And he found her notebook in the green room, and he was able to match that with what she was saying. And then there was another guy who had written down the answers that he had been given, and he mailed the envelopes to himself the day before. So these letters became evidence in the in these testifying before Congress. I wouldn't say trials, but just testifying before Congress.
Right. Well, it's amazing if that many people were involved in this conspiracy that it wasn't outed quicker. It's amazing.
Well, and what's also interesting, you're right, in that there were so many people that did this, and yet it was not really an issue until they had the focal point in the Charles Van Doren character, that he had become, so widely known, and that we couldn't believe that, or the American public at the time couldn't believe that he would have succumbed to, to be a part of this, and it was only really his involvement that drove the people to, in Congress to take it as seriously as they did, I think, and to raise it to those levels,
Maybe because television was still relatively in its early stages, that people really maybe thought that you could run a game show like this, sort of like you might see in a carnival, that, honesty had nothing to do with it. What you had to do is put on a good show. It could be that they hadn't figured out that that's not the way this is going to work. I don't know. Huh.
That's right. Yeah, they were writing the rule book at the time. And there's been a researcher who came out recently who wrote a book called Mediated Authenticity. And she posits that we've gone through different phases with our media in terms of its authenticity. She talks about War of the Worlds and radio being the first time that sort of radio broke this contract with the audience, and the quiz shows were the second instance. And now I haven't got to the end of the book, but she's talking about social media and fake news, and she says that this is another version of that.
Right.
So it's an interesting argument. As I said, I haven't finished the book, so I have to finish the book. But I've always been fascinated by the quiz show scandals and the people that were involved and what it meant for the industry. And I think that to a large extent, a lot of the game shows, I mean, not Wheel of Fortune and not necessarily Jeopardy, although they would be easy to rig. If you think about it on Jeopardy, I've seen a couple times where a contestant will show their buzzer with their finger. They kind of get a little addled that, like, hey, I was buzzing in, but somehow it's not reading me.
Right.
And so you wonder if the producers are sitting there. The producers are sitting there and saying, let's give the edge to person A on this question. So if they buzz in, let's let A buzz in instead of B. Or, I don't know how those algorithms work on the buzzers, but that's one. And the other area is you know those contestants in advance. Therefore, depending on which categories you put there, you can give the edge to that person. So if this guy that's on Jeopardy now, if he's winning lots of money and they want to knock him off, let's say Susie comes along and Susie knows about cooking and boxing, then they can have categories on cooking and boxing, and they know Susie's likely to win those. Now, I'm not saying they do that. I'm just saying it certainly is a possibility.
Right. Well, I think this guy wins because of his first of all, he's a, he knows a ton of stuff, but also because of the way he bets. So he ends up with so much more money than anybody else that you can't catch him.
That's part of the game.
Yeah,
it's
it
part
is part of the game, but
you gotta.
It makes it so cutthroat when it's always been more of a it's been a sweet kind of game of bright people going up against each other in a very decorous kind of way, and now it just seems like God. I'm not enjoying it.
Well,
It'll be interesting to see.
I don't get to watch those programs here. They're syndicated in the U.S., but we don't have them over here. So I suppose I could somehow figure it out to watch it online, but
I'm sure
I won't go to so much trouble for it.
No, but I'm sure this guy, if he keeps going, is going to be like Charles Van Doren's going to end up on the cover of some magazine because it's unbelievable what he's doing. He's only been on four days, and he's changed everything. So he's something.
Well, and the other thing is they like to get. I think every once in a while, I wonder if the producers sit around and they say, we need to get in the news. Like it's almost like a cyclical thing. I did like when you talked about Wheel of Fortune and how they introduced the couples and how over time that this has some kind of an effect on the culture and our societies. That would be an interesting study.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how you would set it up, but your feeling on that would represent an interesting, I think, sociological media-oriented study of some sort, because you're right.
I mean, I do feel that, Wheel of Fortune, and I'm sure some of the other shows have normalized, what a lot of people would find abnormal, same-sex couples and interracial couples.
I always used to, when that show would come on, I would always, because I would watch Jeopardy and then Wheel of Fortune would come on after, and I would, turn the television off. I've never been a big fan of Wheel of Fortune. I always say Wheel of Stupidity.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's not
But I think they like it when there are viral moments. There was one the other day. The thing was treasure chest, but the guy he guessed treasure ghost, and he didn't know that there were only vowels left or something, and so that got in the news. And so this guy on Jeopardy gets in the news. I think the producers like that. They set up for it to get that, because nowadays you've got to get in the social media sphere in order to get anybody's attention. Well, I'm sure their ratings will go way up now that this guy's on it.
Well, I did wonder to myself that with Alex Trebek and his cancer diagnosis, that it is conceivable that the producers thought, let's make, this last year of Alex's tenure, let's make it the greatest ever. And maybe they knew this guy was going to just blow the place away. I don't know.
I'm sure they know because they film it in advance.
Yeah,
so
right.
They're ready to be ready. Just it's kind of like the American Idols and the those shows. They have it down pat now. They have a system. They know